in the United States. I remember about 10 years ago, just getting a glass of that and just saying, okay, Sauvignon Blanc, this is my jam. I never had a Sauvignon Blanc that I really loved before. Now, Chardonnays, I don't really gravitate towards, if you will, because when I think Chardonnay, I think buttery, oaky, woody, smoky, right? And that's just not a profile that I want in my beverage. But I challenge you with this Kim Crawford's Chardonnay to try it, because it's an unoaked version of a Chardonnay. So out of New Zealand, I'll just pour a little for us. This is another great price point. You can find this for $15 to $24 at your grocery store. It does vary in pricing depending on if there's a sale or if you have a rewards card, which we always love to use. Hey, if everybody would take a sip of their first of the Kim Crawford Chardonnay.
You've never seen them when you move things again?
My first flavor that I think of is I taste like a stone.
For me? Are they? They're pretty low on.
Lindsay, I think you went on mute again. No, you're muted. Are you able to unmute?
No. What? Are you online? Oh, I'm muted.
Can you hear us now?
Certainly can. Thank you.
I don't know. It looks like we got mass muted. So where did you last hear us, Tina? Do you know?
Right after the sip of that white wine there.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Thanks, Tina. So what I pull forward is the stone fruit. And then Chef, what do you pull forward?
You know, again, because I have apple in my mouth, I just get really refreshing, and I do get a different apple. Now, this is more of a green apple to me than it is the sweeter one with the rosé. Because the rosé to me was that Asian pear type of feel. Where this one, I definitely get, you know, we have a Fuji apple, but I could see this even being a little tartar like a green apple to me.
And after having the Fuji apple too, I pull a drier finish out of it. It's a little bit more crisp. And crisp. Again, it just pulls from what you eat around you, really pulls it together.
You know, eating it with a grape or something like that.
Oh, perfect.
I think would definitely change it also. I like eating this with dried fruit, especially because everything changes it. And also even the grilled vegetables. If we had like a smokier Chardonnay, I think the grilled vegetables would be like a perfect balance.
Now, Chef, do you gravitate towards Chardonnays, or what do you go for when you're drinking?
If I get a Chardonnay, I like the buttery.
You do?
I like the
okay.
oak. You know, I like something bold.
Yep.
So when I go to the wine, I'm gonna go for a cab.
Yep.
But then I'm gonna have blue cheese there, and I'm gonna have a baguette. Yep. And I'm as happy as can be.
Yep. So you're gonna go for the cab with your blue cheese and your bread. Bread. That sounds good.
Nothing beats the baguette to me and some cheese. So I mean, this baguette is from Bread and Sea, which is one of our. To me, it's the best bakery in town.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then you were saying with the vegetables, pair it with an oaky Chardonnay. Is it good?
It really would, because you got the smoke coming off of the grill with the grilled vegetables.
Yep.
Yet they're really light and everything like that. It will go very well with a Chardonnay that's on the buttery side, on the smoky side.
Absolutely. And then recommendations from this one are also to pair it with poultry. So if you're grilling out, you're having a barbecue in the backyard with chicken, definitely pair this with that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a break right now. Please put any questions that you have in the chat, and we will address it when we come back in just 3 minutes. So thanks for joining us for our first part.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So at this time, Erin is going to go ahead and share a video for you on the U.S. grant.
2017 Arnaise from Lang.
Beautiful. We're going to welcome you back again, Lindsay, but we did go ahead and mute you while we played the video as you two were having a conversation. So you'll have to unmute one last time, and then we'll be unmuting pros for today.
Okay, one last time. Sorry about that, guys. I thought I was muted for the video. So there was one question on there, and actually Chef is looking to see what it is. He was looking for what does Chef recommend here, as he's not familiar with that wine. So Chef, while you're Googling, also, we didn't really go into what the cheese pairings were for that Chardonnay. I know you recommend, I know we were talking about these two.
Those would be the two that I recommend with the rosé and the Chardonnay. And we didn't try the Delise though.
No, we didn't.
The Delise is a really, really creamy cheese. So on this Delise, when you're at the store, this is something that you're going to want to make sure that's creamy. Don't get one that's on the hard side. This needs to be a soft and nice and gooey when you're going to eat it. So it is something in my mind that definitely going to keep on some bread, because it's like butter to begin with. So
It looks so good. For those who are it looks like a melted cheese, but still in form. I mean, I am so excited to dive into this Delise right now.
I love the gooey cheeses. One of my favorite cheeses along this line is Fromage d'Aquilon out of France.
Yep.
This is very similar profile to it. Maybe not as buttery as that one, but it just spreads like soft butter. You know, there's so many great cheeses out there too. Now, again, we picked these up at Trader Joe's, but there's Ralph's around town that have amazing cheeses. The one here downtown in San Diego, the list of cheeses is amazing when I go there. Some of the other Ralph's around my house really don't have the biggest selection, but there's also Whole Foods. Whole Foods has an amazing selection. I think Stump's has a pretty good selection. So, my God, it's such a change in the culinary industry since I first started many years ago, where you really could only get a very basic
from
cheese.
a specialty purveyor, probably.
You had to get them from, they came from Europe, and that was the way it is. These all happen to be from Europe, but you know, the cheese out of the United States, there are some amazing cheeses out of the United States, you know, that are just as good as anywhere else in the world.
Well, and I think a really great buyer's tip too is when you go into a Trader Joe's or into a certain store where it's already prepackaged, think about your cheese purveyors. There's a great shop in Mission Hills. They're also at Whole Foods where you can actually have the size cut to what you would like. So you're not purchasing excess as well. So if you're only having 4 people over for a backyard little picnic, make sure you're getting the amount for 4. And that really makes your dollar stretch a little bit further as well.
Again, the great thing there is usually they're going to give you a little sample too. So you really can experiment on some cheeses that you might not necessarily go for, but once you try it, you're like, oh, wow, that's good. And as we go into these bolder cheeses, I'm going to say it's definitely something, especially if you don't like blue cheese, eat it with a piece of apple, eat it with some grapes, because that totally changes the taste. This Delise with bread and the rosé, it's really sweet.
Chef,
try it with Chard. Yes.
This is Tina Marie chiming in. Speaking of that bread, we got this great question from Susan. Where did you find the bread?
Well, the bread comes from Bread and Sea.
Mhm.
Bread and Sea is one of my favorite bread companies in San Diego,
Mhm.
by far. I mean, if I, even at home, I
You'll buy
look
it.
for the Bread and Sea, because it's a traditional baguette.
Mhm.
The owner, trained in France, bought the ovens from France so he could mimic what the baguette tastes like in France. And if you're in France, this is what the baguette tastes like.
Yeah.
So it's the best one in town to me. If I'm desperate, I'll buy it from somewhere else, but
And Bread and Sea's retail store is in Hillcrest, is that
yes,
right?
it is.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, so you can also get unique different cuts too that you would see where it's like a little roll that you break off of a baguette. What's that style called?
Epi
Epi.
baguette.
Yeah, Epi baguette, which is awesome and great for sharing. Very COVID friendly.
To me, it's
You
a
wanna
little,
slice
on
it.
the softer side. I'm a big traditionalist on these baguettes.
Yeah.
I've been eating it since I can remember.
Yeah. So, but
Okay.
great bread over there.
And that is delicious with the two.
Yes, I'm very glad that we're doing this at 3:30 in the afternoon so that we can really enjoy our wine and cheese pairings. It's absolutely wonderful with both of the lighter
So
wines.
on the Gouda, I think it's going to go more with the saldo, but maybe we can try it with the other ones.
Mhm.
So on this one, it comes with this black rind in it. What I like to do, of course, is we'll take a little pour it. You can do it over an open flame, and that just gets that little wax warm, so it can peel right off.
I would just like to raise the hands of how many have blow torches at home.
Everybody has a blowtorch, don't they?
No, for making creme brulee or taking the rind off of cheeses.
But it comes right off.
It's perfect.
Really easy with that. But let's say if you didn't have that, you have an open
The
flame at
oven.
home.
Mhm.
I'll just take it over the open flame and get it
And
warm.
just do it like that.
You
Yeah.
just want to get it warm. You don't want to get too hot. If it's too hot, people just tear. So there's a medium point where you need to be working on. I love this Gouda. It's from Trader Joe's. It's a Gouda out of Holland. To me, it's very similar to the Beemster Gouda, which I buy and love all the time. And it's nice. It's very rich. It has some salt crystals going on it, like a very good Parmesan. This one you're going to want to slice thin and give yourself a small little thin slice.
Chef, if you were to build your perfect charcuterie board, what would be on it?
Well, I tell you, the Delice is delicious.
Yep.
I always love some type of blue cheese, and I love this Gouda too.
Yeah.
There's another Mimolette, which is a French.
Mhm.
I go try to say it's the best cheddar you ever had. It's very firm, so it's not like cheddar cheese, but it just has that rich type of flavor with the salt on it. So those definitely are some things that I always go for. And then prosciutto is one of those big things. But if you can get real Iberico ham,
Mhm.
once you have that, that's amazing. So I'd say that
Yeah.
those would be the top things. And I also love sarda sausage.
Mhm.
The dried sarda is delicious too. So I'd like to try this with the Chardonnay,
Okay.
and then we're gonna
Smoked
try.
Gouda is one of my favorites, so I'm
This
excited.
isn't smoked. This is
Oh,
just
I'm sorry,
nice-
aged
this is
Gouda.
just nice aged.
Mm.
So you should be able to get a little bit of saltiness, and you can
Mhm.
see the salt crystals inside there.
Yeah, and my first bite, I actually got a little bite to it. Like I felt it as I crunched. Very nice.
So I have a little bit of the rosé left. So I say you got to try everything with everything, because you never know what's really going to work.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's not bad.
Mm-mm.
I'm going to try a little bit of that Chardonnay.
Here you go.
Thank you.
A little refresh.
I think better with the rosé.
Mhm. I mean, I would eat it with anything though too.
I would too. 'Cause
It
it's
pulls
delicious.
better, yes. When Twist Corks first came out, I just thought how romantic. Now, as I'm a mother of two, I think How convenient. So I love that because of cork and especially cream Crawford's one of them that does twist tops on all of their wines. But we're going to proceed on to our last wine today, which is the Saldo, which is a Zinfandel out Prisoner, which is wine company in Napa Valley. So I have been a huge fan of Prisoner for many years. I can actually remember my first time I was introduced to it was the Prisoner wine. So Prisoner Wine Company made the Prisoner wine. And I just love the complexity of it. I love the flavor profiles that they pulled forward. But at that time, and we're talking about probably 13 years ago when I was introduced to it, I remember thinking, you know, you really couldn't find it on the shelves either. And I was in Chicago at the time, and I could find it a few places. I could find it at Whole Foods or a certain wine shop, but it was one bottle. Prisoner Wine Company has come a long way since then. This is their 2018 Zinfandel called Saldo. Now, Saldo is a Latin term meaning here and there. So it's not just from one place. Prisoner Wine Company does source their grapes from all over California. So they can't say that the grapes are just grown here. So I think that Saldo is a great term for this Zinfandel. Zinfandel does also have a history in California, because when you look at the types of grapes, I thought this was an interesting set, and I had to write it down because as I was looking at these details, it's the third leading wine grape variety in California, and it has more than 44,000 acres planted in California alone. So great local as being Northern California wine that we have. This is a little bit higher on the price point, but one of the lowest price points for Prisoner. This one was purchased at $26. So again, I think another great buy. It has just like deep ruby color to it. And let's take a sip if you have a glass. So we'll take a sip right now.
Not approved for use with any food should never.
So for me, I pull out the black cherry in this. It feels very earthy to me, or the flavor comes out very earthy. What do you pull?
You know, I get currant, black cherry. I could see some finishes, some chocolate.
Yep.
And I meant to bring some chocolate out here, but I didn't, because you definitely, to me, I get that finish of chocolate at the end.
Yep.
And that's why I like these big, bold
Yes.
type of reds. And they go so well with blue cheese.
It really does.
I mean, Stilton might not be this exotic cheese, but my God, is it so good. You know, I just go crazy for it. I also have figs and things like that would probably pair well with it also, whether that would be a golden fig or the black mission figs. But let's try some of this cheese.
I'm excited. Let's do it. So bold flavor with bold cheese. Here we go. To me, this blue cheese is just so beautiful too. The marbleizing that happens in the cheese. And I just think about what other foods I would pair this with. I do think like a red meat would go very well.
This is like heaven if you ask me. When I get a steak, I'm at home and we're going to have red wine. That's definitely my favorite. But then again, I can just eat cheese and a baguette for dinner.
I could too. You're French a little bit, aren't you?
Oh, no.
Oh, you're not? I thought you were a little.
I'm like a Polish. I'm Polish. Some crazy Albanian mixture between my two parents.
Well, I will pull the French Canadian out of myself and just eat cheese and wine, even though they probably ate pickled herring of French Canadians versus cheese and wine.
They drank beer and played hockey.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Such a great profile together. Chef, what do you think that trend is for summer 2021? We haven't talked about this yet, but do you think that there's any trends that you see coming forth?
I think everyone's just happy because we're over what just happened last year. I know I sure am. I think people are, maybe they're just going to want to be outside barbecuing, you know, and being at the beach and getting back to normal. I think that's the big thing. It's just getting back to normal.
I agree with you. I think that we're already starting to see smaller gatherings. I was at Kate Sessions Park the other weekend, and it's amazing to see all the people that are out and about. Some still socially distancing, and some are getting a little bit closer. Jeff and I are fully vaccinated, and we are, so it probably should have started that off with that, but that's why we're so close to each other. We would definitely share a meal together, and we'll see. Tina, are there any other questions in the chat box for us?
No, I'm not seeing any other questions. There were some comments, but I'd love to be able to, if I can, drop your email in the chat. So if anyone has follow-up questions about what was presented today or want to reach out and say thank you, they can do so. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. We're so happy to be with you today. We wish you only the best, and safe, gatherings and safe travels in the year to come.
Thank you.
Hope
Thank
to
you
have
so
at the
much.
hotel.
Yeah.
Cheers.
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 Cheers, guys.
Thanks again, Chef and Lindsay. We appreciate all your efforts in presenting such a great experience for us. I personally love wine and I love cheese. You're welcome to stick around for the rest of the event if you'd like. And then
Thank you.
to our guests, if you're ever looking for a luxury collection hotel that is distinguished by quiet glamour and enduring sophistication, then please check out the US Grant. Embrace the timeless elegance in San Diego's Gaslamp Quarter. So now we're going to go ahead and move forward to our official welcome message by our current MPI president and award-winning DJ and MC, Spencer Beasy.
Thanks, Tina Marie. Hey, everybody. It's great to see you. Happy May. I don't know. Are we good? There we are. So it's so exciting to see everybody here. I know it's a great topic for, especially our small business owners. Mark and Lindsay, I want to thank you. That was fantastic. I'm very jealous as I was watching. I'm just imagining what the kitchen must smell like right now with all the wine and the cheese and the bread and, beer and hockey. That sounds like a future MPI virtual pre-event session, Tina Maria. Maybe we can get that going. So we are very excited. Speaking of being back in person and in beautiful hotels, we have the Mpi Awards Gala coming up very, very soon on June 24th. And oh, I see it right there. It's down there in the corner. I think I was allowed to announce that it's at the Town and Country. We're still just finalizing details with them. So the graphic is beating me to the punch just a little bit. But put that on your calendar right now. You're going to see the email come out here in maybe the next week or so. And we want to have you in person. We're going to do all of this safely, so don't worry about that. But we're going to be in person. We're going to be, just back at it. We're all starving for that one-on-one MPI, friend and colleague attention and just that interaction with one another. So I hope you'll put that on your calendar and join us. We can't wait to see you. Next on, speaking of that, next on my list of things to talk about is our member awards. So the way that we give away awards here in MPI San Diego is you nominate. So I'm going to ask Aaron Scholes, our chapter administrator, to drop the link into the chat. And that link allows you, if you're a member, you can go in and you can nominate another MPI member for, there are a number of categories. So choose the categories, nominate for one or two or all of them, whatever suits your fancy. So go in there and nominate people that you think are doing a great job. There's a couple of new categories and slightly adjusted categories for the 2020 year. So take a look at that and nominate as many times as you want. You can nominate every one of your friends if you want to. Keep them on. You could nominate all of us if you'd like. Good to see you, buddy. Hey, I see a lot of on there. I want to pause out of my announcements. Uh-oh, my view disappeared. Of my scheduled announcements, I want to take just a second. I see a lot of people that have joined us. I see Steve Gale, Cheryl Marie. I see Mark Lehman. Mark Lehman was our very gracious sponsor from EdCon 2020. So he's here. I'm glad you're here. Angela with Fit City and so many others. I'm glad we've got a great group together here. I just wanted to take a few minutes, and I see Nan Pace, a new member. She's here. I just wanted to acknowledge a few of you and just say thank you for being here. We don't get enough chances to touch base with you and just say hello. Also, so that chapter awards. Next slide, Aaron. We are going to give away an MPI membership. And you ask, what's the catch? There is no catch. We did this back in February, and it was such a hit. We're going to try to do it one more time. So you on the screen, the deadline is June 15th. I'm going to ask Aaron to drop the link in the chat for this one as well. So if you're on here today and you're not a member, or if you watch this, we are recording it, so you'll be able to watch this later. If you're watching this later and you're not a member, click the link, find it on our website if you don't have it here in the chat box, if you look at this later, and tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us why you'd make a great MPI member and what you bring to the table, and we want another member. So we have a membership scholarship to give away, and we hope that you'll jump in and nominate yourself for that. And we're going to do that very quickly. I expect that to be awarded before the end of June. So deadline to submit is June 15th, and then we'll be giving that away really quickly after. And then I'm going to break script here, Tina Marie, I apologize. I'm going to add one more thing to my things to talk about here. We have decided we are going to do a planners roundtable. A little bit about what that is. We want to bring the planners, the MPI member planners together. There's so many people out there. Sorry, Aaron, I messed up our slideshow there. I got ahead. I went off script. So we want to bring our planners together and just talk. We want to see what is out there. You know, what's your mind on? What's the world look like for you? What are you having challenges with? What are you having successes with? We want to have that and give you all a place to talk and converse with one another. So be looking for that. You'll see that on probably our MPI Members Unite page on Facebook, as well as a direct email to all of our MPI planner members. So, and then later on down the road, we'll also do a supplier one that's already in discussion. So thank you very much again for being here. My name is Spencer Beasy. I own a company called Mobile Music Plus. I am your MPI chapter president, and it's been a tough year, but we are getting back in person very soon. So make sure you're on board. And now I get to introduce our VP, our incoming VP of membership. Kristen Elgo is going to take over here in about a month. And we're very excited. Kristen, take it away.
Hey, everybody. I don't have the wine, but I have a Mai Tai that my husband made me to cheers you all. It is so great to see everybody's faces. And I wanted to come on here and just say welcome to our new members. We've had our membership stayed pretty solid through everything, which we're so happy with. But we actually have some people that have joined us new. We have some students, some planners. So their names are all listed here from March and April. So I just wanted to say welcome. If you're here on the call, raise your hand or give me a little trumpet hat or something from your reactions on Zoom, but welcome. And we're so happy to have you. And to reiterate what Spencer said, we are awarding another MPI membership. So yes, please, if you're watching this and you're not a member, apply, submit. And also I'm going to add my email in the chat. And if you're interested in membership and want to know what it's about and costs and how you can make it work for you and what's in it for you, email me. We'll set up a time to chat, and because it's we have an amazing organization and an amazing group of people that are here. So yeah, I'm going to send it back to Tina Marie.
Well, I'll gladly take it, but what I'm going to do is introduce the amazing Rachel, and she is going to introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Tina Marie, and thank you, Kristen. So I get the pleasure of introducing Jonathan Bell, who is going to be giving our keynote address right now. I'll tell you a little bit about Jonathan. Jonathan Bell is the owner and sole proprietor of Bell Legal Consulting, a law firm providing general counsel services for small and mid-sized businesses and nonprofit organizations. Jonathan regularly advises businesses on a wide range of employment matters, including how to effectively navigate and minimize the risk of misclassification under recent changes to California's independent contractor laws, AB5 and AB2277. Jonathan also advises clients on intellectual property matters, entity formation, and general contractual matters. Jonathan earned his law degree magna cum laude from Loyola University Chicago School of Law and his undergraduate degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan right now and let everybody know that if you have questions for Jonathan throughout his talk, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll be keeping track, and when he is done speaking, we'll have a Q&A session, and that way Jonathan will be able to answer the questions that you have. So Jonathan, take it away.
Thanks so much. First of all, can everyone see the slide that I just put on the screen? Give me a thumbs up. Awesome, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you all today. And I want to thank both Rachel and Spencer for inviting me to speak to the chapter. As Rachel just said, my name is Jonathan Bell. I am the owner and principal attorney at Bell Legal Consulting, a law firm that provides general counsel services to small and mid-sized businesses and nonprofit organizations. And I am here today to discuss the relevant topic of California's independent contractor laws. That's AB5 and AB2257. Now, this law is very important, and it is one of particular relevance to the meetings professional world, especially as California starts to ease capacity restrictions in light of the new CDC guidelines that came out last week, in light of California's announcement yesterday about the mask mandate. And I'm guessing, given the turnout today, that this is not exactly news. But the question is why? And it's a twofold question. That's why is this law important? And why is this law of particular relevance to meeting planners and meeting suppliers? Well, let's take a 50,000-foot view here and take it from a simple perspective. Let's assume you own your own business. I am guessing that some of you on here do just that, own your own business, and you need to hire someone to do some work for you. That's very common. Well, in California, technically, anyone you hire to do work for you is typically classified one of two ways. They're classified as an employee, or they're classified as an independent contractor. And while you may think that it's a very simple distinction, and let's be honest, oftentimes it is a very simple distinction, it might also be somewhat complex, and there might be some nuances that have serious consequences if the person is inadvertently misclassified. Now, AB5 was set to take the world by storm, or California by storm, and be a major focus in 2020. The pandemic obviously had other ideas and upended everything, including the meeting professionals world. However, as the world, and San Diego in particular, has started to open up again, this topic is once again of particular relevance to all meeting planners and all suppliers. Whether you own your own business, whether you want to hire help for an upcoming event, whether you work for a company that is part of the industry, or whether you are somebody who is part of what is known as the gig economy and likes the idea of working as you please, picking and choosing work at your convenience. So let's get started. And I'm so sorry, but I have to do this because I am an attorney. And the attorney inside of me says that while I am so thrilled to be here today, and I am very excited for this discussion, I just want to clarify that all information in this upcoming presentation and any discussion is given for educational purposes and is not to be taken as direct legal advice. There's no attorney-client relationship formed by virtue of me being here talking to you. And every situation has numerous variables to consider and different nuances to consider. So if you have any follow-up questions after today's presentation, I strongly recommend following up with somebody who is very familiar with this area of law. All right, more onto the fun stuff right now. Fun if you like this kind of this kind of work, and I get very excited about these topics. So the objectives for today's discussion in the next 25 to 30 minutes: explore AB5 and relevant changes in the form of AB2257 that may benefit meeting planners and meeting suppliers. Address relevant considerations under current law as they apply to various cohorts within the meetings industry. I'm going to say that the lion's share of this presentation is going to focus on these first two. Understand various misconceptions that may give rise to independent contractor misclassification, and discuss the importance of having internal and following internal protocols to ensure compliance with the law and minimize risk of non-compliance with the law. So those are the main objectives today that we'll discuss in the next few minutes. And let's start off with some background. This is going to be a very fact-heavy slide and presentation in general, but this particular slide in general, and I realize that some of you are well-versed in this particular topic, as it went into effect on January 1, 2020. But last year, let's face it, last year threw everybody for a loop. And this serves as a good refresher and levels the playing field. It brings everyone up on equal ground in terms of what the law is and how we got to this specific point. So let's start with prior to 2018. And 2018 is this benchmark year for independent contractor law in California. Independent contractor law in California was governed by the Borrello test. This was a test from the California Supreme Court off a case called Borrello, and it listed 11 different factors that helped a court determine whether or not a worker could be classified as an independent contractor or should be classified as an employee in the eyes of California employment law. No single factor of the 11 factors was controlling or determinative, and not all 11 factors needed to be met. But the factors looked at various ways it really just determining the type of control that the hiring entity would have over the worker, with the idea that the more control that the hiring entity had, the more likely that the worker would be classified as an employee rather than as an independent contractor. Now, 11 factors, as I've mentioned, I'll say 11 factors numerous times throughout this presentation. It included factors including whether the worker was engaged in the type of work as the hiring entity was. This was generally given a lot of weight. The degree of skill involved for the project or the task, whether the worker brought his or her own tools, the payment method. Was it one large sum or was it multiple payments throughout? Whether the parties believed that they were forming an independent contractor or an employee-employer relationship, generally taken care of by an agreement between the parties. So 2018, that magical year for independent contractor law in California, the California Supreme Court steps in once again, and they changed the rules for independent contractors in another Supreme Court case called Dynamics. This introduced the ABC test, a far more restrictive test that required that each part of the ABC test be met. Remember, Borello, 11 factors, you don't need to meet all 11 factors. These are just different factors that help guide whether or not a person is an independent contractor or an employee under California law. Dynamics, 3 factors, all 3 have to be met. What Dynamics also did was that it presumed that the worker, led with the presumption that the worker is an employee, and it shifted the burden of proof to the hiring entity, the presumed employer, to show that the worker was in fact an independent contractor and not an employee. Now let's move on to 2019. The legislation steps in. Governor Newsom signs AB5 into law. This codifies the ABC test from the Dynamics case and provided for various exemptions, which, if met, meant that Borello applied. Remember Borello, the original 11-factor test. I have no doubt that this matter was top of mind prior to March 2020, but as the world shut down, independent contractors became secondary in terms of priority. And let's face it, meetings turned from in-person to virtual. Employers were more focused on how to keep their existing employees rather than focusing on their independent contractor classification, not to mention all sorts of brand new employment laws that we're still seeing as a result of the pandemic. But AB5 remained intact, and the state did not temporarily suspend any of the strict requirements of AB5 like they did with other laws. Now, with any sweeping legislation, California legislators stepped in again, and they enacted AB2257 in late 2020. This is known as catch-up legislation. I've got a whole bit to discuss on this when we talk about some of the exemptions in AB2257, and in particular, how they apply to the meetings professional world. What AB2257 did, it modified and it clarified various portions of AB5, specifically as to additional exemptions from the ABC test, again, which would be very beneficial, some of which would be very beneficial for meeting planners and meeting suppliers. So we've talked about the ABC test. What exactly is this ABC test? A, the worker is free from the control and direction of the hiring entity in connection with the performance of the work. B, the person performs the work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. And C, the person is customarily engaged in an independently established occupation or business of the same nature as the work involved in the work performed. So let's take a step back. The key here is, how literally do we interpret this ABC test? And this is a question that we are still awaiting further court or legislative guidance on. But for the time being, you want to interpret it as literally as possible, and you look sort of at the intention of the legislature when they enacted this ABC test. So for the purposes of the ABC test, let's look at A. The worker is free from the control and the direction of the hiring entity. Well, that's that control factor over the worker's work, very similar to the Borello test. That's a rather standard protocol to satisfy here. So A can be satisfied relatively easily. C can be satisfied relatively easily as well. Independent contractors typically are engaged in an independent business or occupation that is similar to the work that they're performing. Let's say you own your own business and you have leaky pipes. You call a plumber. The plumber comes, the plumber fixes the pipes. The plumber is customarily engaged in an independently established trade occupation. As a plumber, that's the exact same work that the plumber is doing for you, fixing the pipes in your business. The hard one to satisfy is B. B is the tricky one. Without further guidance or subsequent legislation, either from the court or the legislatures on this standard, typically the prevailing thought here is that B is satisfied as long as nobody else at your company does this specific work. Think of a plumber, think of the electrician. These are actually the examples that are most often given. Now I want to throw two scenarios at you guys right now. Think IT. Everybody uses computers. We're all using computers for just about everything. You're all watching me pretty much on either a computer or a smart tablet right here. Let's say you own a business. Let's say you own a small business. You have 3 employees, one of which is your office manager. This person does your scheduling. This person makes sure that you have your supplies. And this person is actually a little tech savvy and understands the dynamics of computers and email, sets up your email, can fix little glitches. But now you've got a major issue and you've got to call that IT consulting firm. So you call the IT consulting firm, they come and they fix your computers. How do you classify that IT consulting firm? Well, if you look at the ABC test, you have, sure, you're in the meetings industry. You're not necessarily in the IT industry, but you've got somebody who fixes your computers. So does that actually mean that the IT consulting firm won't pass the ABC test based on the fact that you've got somebody who does that there? Well, we're still awaiting guidance on this. Now, generally, when I give this example, there's always a little concern from people thinking I'm always violating this law. I want to take a step back here and say there are numerous exemptions. We will specifically talk about the 99% of the time the IT consulting firm is going to get in and classify properly as an independent contractor. But I just want to explain how tough this law is. Example number 2, and I'm doing this specifically for Spencer and Rachel because this is what we talked about when we met a few months back. Let's say you're a DJ and you hire 2 people to come in and pump up the crowd for you. Well, they are doing different work. You're mixing music. You are providing the musical entertainment. They are just getting people on the dance floor. They're getting people excited. They're bringing the energy. But your job as a DJ is to entertain, and the people you are bringing along with you are performing work inside the scope of your business. Remember these 2 examples because I will return to these examples in a little bit. And I just want to remind you, and I will say a handful of things multiple times. I do this intentionally because I want you to remember these particular points. The presumption is the worker is an employee and the burden is on the employer to show otherwise. I also want to say that if you are a sole proprietor and don't have any employees, generally it is a little bit easier to get past the ABC test because you focus on one thing, it's easier to bring in. So once you start hiring people to help, whether you do so as independent contractors or employees, that you really have to be mindful of the specific parameters of ABC or the exemptions, which we'll talk about in a few slides. So why? Why do we care? Why do we care about any of this? We know we have independent contractors. We know we have employees. There are major differences in the eyes of California employment law. And let me take another step back and say that California is a very employee-friendly state. I'll repeat that. California, very employee-friendly state. Employees are entitled to all wage and hour laws, including minimum wage, rest breaks, meal breaks, overtime pay, waiting periods, workplace safety laws, workplace protections such as workers' compensation. They're entitled to protection from anti-retaliation laws, anti-discrimination and anti-harassment laws. They get sick leave accruals. Independent contractors in general are not afforded any of these benefits under the law. Believe it or not, this is actually a sticking point. Many people formerly classified as independent contractors as part of this gig economy were independent contractors for just this reason. They wanted the flexibility, they wanted the independence to take on work as they pleased. AB5 came about in large part as a result of employers abusing the system. Employees cost money, and I'm not merely talking salary and potential benefits. It is much more cost effective to classify workers as independent contractors from a business perspective than as employees. Employers with one employee are required, or businesses who have one employee are required to maintain workers' compensation insurance. They must pay into Social Security, unemployment, disability. And it's a lot more cost effective not to do so, so you hire the independent contractors. But the legislators saw this and they said because of this abuse by employers, by businesses, they enacted this legislation, making it more difficult to properly classify workers as independent contractors. And again, going back to the whole presumption that the worker is an employee. All right, so I have mentioned exemptions a few times. The ABC test is the main test to determine whether or not a worker is an independent contractor or an employee. Remember the default being the employee. However, there are many carved out exemptions, and note the word possible at the top of this slide. I do this intentionally here. Possible exemptions include licensed attorneys, licensed engineers, licensed accountants, marketing professionals, human resources, grant writers, graphic designers. All right, this is good. This is good to know. If you run a small business, you want somebody to do your graphic design work for you, you can hire that graphic designer and you can potentially get them in and classify them as an independent contractor. You want somebody to do your marketing for you, you don't have the time to do your social media. You hire somebody out there, they can come in and do your social media for you and potentially classify them as an independent contractor. You have an attorney review your contracts, you have an accountant do your work, do the books. You don't have to worry about classifying them necessarily as employees. Also physicians, surgeons, dentists, podiatrists, not sure how applicable that is for this group, maybe. Also freelance writers, photojournalists. A couple points here. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There is a large list of exemptions under AB5 and in AB2275 if you actually read the text of the law. The other thing I want to make sure and make very clear here is that some of these exemptions have specific additional parameters that must be met in order for the exemption to apply. I mention these primarily to provide a small example of various professionals that may, under certain circumstances, be exempted from the ABC test. And again, I just want to make sure that I'm clear that there may be other requirements generally going around business ownership in order for these exemptions to kick in under the law. Exemptions, and I know I mentioned this once earlier, exemptions don't necessarily guarantee independent contractor status. Rather, if you meet the exemption, it's the 11-factor Borello test, that old test concerning control, instead of the more restrictive ABC test from the Dynamics case. All right, so it is relatively difficult, generally speaking, to classify somebody as an independent contractor through the ABC test. Generally, the first exemption that I check is the standard business-to-business exemption, which in both AB5 and AB2257 list 12 requirements, pretty much all of which must be met in order for this exemption to apply. I generally use this as the first fallback provision unless I know that there's just another specific exemption that applies, but I always warn them that this can be a rather threshold to meet. Remember, Borello, 11 standards, you didn't have to meet all of them. Now AB5, you've got the ABC test, all three, and when you've got the exemptions, you generally speaking have to fulfill all of the requirements in that exemption. This is a tough law, and this again was done intentionally to prevent employer abuse of the system in terms of how they classify their employees. But remember the IT example I gave earlier. This is the exemption that you use to go around the employment versus independent contractor law and classify the IT company and have them fix your computers potentially without violating the law. How did this play out into law? AB5 required that the business service provider, the independent contractor, provide services directly to the contracting business rather than to the customers of the contracting business. This is a very difficult standard. Let's say you're an event planner and you hire help for day of coordination. You can make a really good faith effort to be in compliance under the law. However, it is very likely that the day of help is going to provide services to the customers and not merely to the hiring entity. Very difficult standard. AB2257 modifies this slightly. It eliminates who the independent contractor can provide services to under the condition that the independent contractor and or their employees provide services under their separate business entity and also contract with other businesses. It's a lesser threshold and it makes it a little bit more plausible, but it's still a difficult threshold. Let's go back to the DJ example, who hires those two people to come in and pump up the crowd. Obviously under AB5, which was usurped by AB2257, they're providing services to the customers, not to the business. Under 2257, I mean, I guess you can have them wear shirts that indicate the name of their standalone business, but it's a harder threshold to meet. But now the good news, specifically for that example. I've mentioned AB2257 as catch-up legislation before. Catch-up legislation typically happens in large sweeping bills, controversial bills such as AB5. The legislation takes a step back. They realize they're getting fielded with all these questions, they're getting fielded with all these concerns, complaints about the law, and they clarify and modify the law based on some of the challenges in follow-up legislation or catch-up legislation. And this is what they did in AB2257, and they were getting a lot of feedback from the meetings world, the event space, the planner side, the supplier side. They were getting a lot of feedback here. One way that AB2257 made life easier for meeting planners and suppliers was this new business-to-business exemption that focused specifically on single engagement events. This exemption has 8 requirements, again, most of which must be met. It's still a tough standard. However, it lessens some of the restrictions that you would see in AB5 and AB2257 standard business to business exemption. I think this is a great provision for the meetings world in particular. What specifically did it do? It eliminated who the business service provider, the independent contractor, can provide services to. It also eliminated any mention of the location of the work. This was actually addressed in both the standard business to business exemption of AB5 and 2257. It wasn't as concerning to me in terms of who the independent contractor could provide its services to. There were ways to get around that and still be in compliance with the law, but it eliminated this for the single engagement event. And it defines a single engagement event as either a standalone, non-recurring event like a wedding, or a series of events at the same location no more than once a week, like your weekly meeting, or maybe your monthly group chapter. Now, again, this is where I said the example of the two people hired by the DJ to pump up the crowd. This is how you can bring them on and classify them as independent contractors and be in compliance with AB 2257. But I want to make one point clear. This is a great exemption. It is a new exemption, but it is one that falls under a business to business exemption, which means that the independent contractors that you bring in must operate as a requisite business under the eyes of the California law in order for the exemption to apply. All right, another helpful exemption carved out by AB 2257 helps the music making industry. And I put musicians in quotes here because that is not the formal name of the exemption. It's actually a very technical name that I'll read here. It's occupations in connection with creating, marketing, promoting, or distributing sound recordings or musical compositions. That's what fits into this specific exemption. Think of a band, all right? Think of your band. Everybody has hired out a band before, I'm assuming, or been a part of an event that has had a band. You hired for a wedding, your gala, a bar mitzvah. You have a band, they're there. I don't have any clients that are bands, so I can't speak specifically to this, but I have had conversations. So my gut instinct is that generally speaking, how bands operate is one or two people own the band and they hire people out and pay them for performance. They've got their group of people, they've got their singers, they've got their vocalists, but I mean, they've got their musicians, they've got their vocalists. They go out, they play, sometimes they bring on a DJ with them. Well, AB5 was a nightmare for bands, at least as far as I understand how most bands operate. Say a band, maybe a band does operate and classifies their band members as employees and provide them with all the requisite laws. My understanding is that most don't. So in this case, AB5 was a nightmare. How do you go and perform and provide performance and have this livelihood if AB5 is going to be this restrictive? Honestly, if you have a band, all band members would need to be technically classified as employees. So this exemption came about. Who does it apply to? Again, not an exhaustive list. And actually, it's a very comprehensive exemption, and I'll talk about that in a second. But musicians, musical groups, there's your band. Musical engineers or mixers, there's your DJs. Vocalists, obviously, singers in the band there. And again, a word of caution here, if you've actually read through this exemption, there's a lot of specific details, exceptions to the exemptions listed in this provision. The key here, again, is to know that this exemption exists, but just be mindful of those additional factors that may need to be in play before the exemption kicks in. This goes a little bit hand in hand with the single engagement business to business exception that I talked about, but it actually doesn't have a business to business component to it, meaning you don't need to have an independent business to be part of the band, so to speak. So a potentially very beneficial and very helpful exemption for the meetings world. All right, common misconceptions. There are a lot of different misconceptions about AB5 and AB 2257. I get three pretty regularly, so I want to address this. And I'll call this first one the Uber and Lyft myth, that because of Prop 22 that was passed by California's legislature last November, AB5 is no longer law. I wish it were this simple. What Prop 22 did was it exempted Uber and Lyft, as well as I think one or two food delivery apps, from classifying their drivers as employees, and instead allowed them to maintain the driver's independent contractor status. The cruelty here and the irony here is that one of the main reasons for AB5 was the fight with the rideshare companies for not classifying their drivers as employees. The proposition only created this new rule and this exemption for Uber and Lyft and the delivery app drivers that were part of the big campaign last November. It does not eliminate the law or modify it for any other group. The next one, they want to remain independent contractors. They want their freedom. Now, this is a big sticking point. I touched on this earlier. Many people who are part of the gig economy actually want to be independent, taking on projects as they choose, not working for one or two employers. And this takes away some of their independence. I don't know if you were reading articles about this law right before January 2020, there were a handful of articles written about people who made a great living as independent contractors throughout California. Under the new law, the legislature is who defines who can work in this manner. So even if the worker wants to remain free and independent of employment constraints, it might not be possible, at least until additional legislation passes or there's additional court guidance on this particular point. And I'm going to guess that there's not going to be much flexibility here, because again, even when you open the door a little bit, it's that employer abuse that I know that the legislature was so concerned about, and which is why they enacted such a stringent law in AB5. All right, the next one, another big one. It's in our contract. We agreed to this. We signed an agreement. We voluntarily entered into this agreement, knowingly understanding that the relationship here was that of an independent contractor and not of an employee-employer. It's a great argument, and it's subject to much confusion here, because prior to Dynamics, prior to 2018, this would have been one of the factors that a court would have looked at when looking into the nature of the agreement. The parties knowingly, presumably voluntarily entered into this agreement. They understood that there was no employee-employer relationship. Well, under AB5 and AB2275, the fact that you have an agreement is irrelevant, because it's really what's in the agreement that matters. And I will touch upon that in a second. And I say it's very important you have an agreement, but it's what's in your agreement that matters. It's the ABC test or one of the statutory exemptions that must apply for there to be proper independent contractor classification. And again, the burden is on the hiring entity to show that the worker is not an employee, but rather an independent contractor. All right, let's close out by something that we could probably discuss for several hours. I'll just name a few tips, best practices for the hiring entity. Have an agreement, have something in writing, possibly best to have multiple provisions that you can use, but certainly something along the lines of a business-to-business exemption. Don't necessarily rely on old agreements. If they're before January 1, 2020, they very well might be outdated. Keep written documentation. I think any lawyer is going to tell you that document. And be wary of vendor agreements. Remember the IT company. These may be outdated too. Keep in mind who's hiring who here. You're hiring the IT consultant to come in and fix your computers. You're technically hiring them. So the burden is on you to classify them as an independent contractor. So be mindful of those agreements as you go forward. Have internal protocols for anybody you bring on to do work for you. Obviously, if you're just by yourself, it's a lot harder to have a checklist. But if you have a handful of employees, have a checklist, have an internal checklist, follow it, and ensure that any independent contractors who need to have their own business entity show proof prior to doing work. I actually had a client who did this prior to AB5, and I thought it was a fantastic protocol that they had. They always kept a copy of their business certificate, whether they were a sole proprietor, an S Corp or an LLC. They had a copy of it so that they knew that this person, generally speaking, was a sole proprietorship, had their own business, and therefore could work for them as an independent contractor. Stay current with legal requirements and take inventory. How are you currently classifying anybody that does work for you? Is it necessary to classify or reclassify or gather additional information, such as the business license? And if so, begin the process immediately. And for those that are independent contractors, do you have a standalone business license? It might be a good idea to have one. And if you have any questions about that, speak with somebody who is a professional in business entity formations. So speaking of questions, that is the lion's share of the presentation. I know this is a dense subject. There's a lot of information here, and I am more than happy to answer any questions that come about. I saw a bunch of questions pop through, and I am more than happy to answer any questions.
Then I can thank you very much. The questions are just like rolling in, and there's some definite themes to the questions. So several of us, I think, are wondering the same thing, although there's some also more particular questions. So here's one that I'll ask from somebody who has their own meeting agency. So they have a staff of 4 employees, but frequently have standalone events that require 20 staff on site. The on-site staff only need to work 15 hours total over a weekend. Do they need to all become employees, hired and then terminated?
So if they're for a standalone event, it's a one-time event, they can most likely get in under the single engagement event business to business exemption. You don't necessarily need to hire them as employees, but what you need to do is take a look at that exemption and make sure that all of the parameters are followed to get them in and properly classify them that way.
Okay, all right, thank you. So another
And
question.
I want to take one step back. Sorry, Rachel.
Yeah.
If you're talking about the hotel's employees, that probably has more to do with the nature of the contract between the two businesses. I mean, I would need a little bit more facts there, but if you're talking about bringing in additional people to help day of that are not working for the hotel or working for the venue that you're holding the business, you can most likely get them in as long as all the parameters of that exemption apply. Sorry, I wanted to clarify that.
No, that's okay. And so that question did come from an independent planner who has her own company. But actually kind of going along with that, can you speak to how this does apply to hotel workers?
It's a great question. I actually haven't gotten there. I would imagine that the business-to-business, the standalone business-to-business exemption will apply here. That's just part of your vendor agreement that you have with them. I would have to take a look specifically at the facts of that particular matter, because that's not what I've gotten before. But you know, as I have helped out with events in the past, there are certainly event hotel staff that come in. I would imagine their employer is the hotel. That would fall under the auspice of their job description. So you might not even need to worry about this particular law, but it's something that's very fact specific that I would want to look into.
Okay, thank you. Someone is asking if you can share current suggested contract language.
That's a loaded question. I certainly would take a look at the law, and I would certainly put in as much language that is in the law in your specific contract. You know, people have different types of service agreements where they put the independent or an employment agreement where they put the nature of the employment. Sometimes it's a clause. It's very specific to who it is you're hiring and what it is that you're having them do and whether or not they fit into one of the exemptions there. So, you know, if you're looking at somebody who's exempted by like for example, if you're looking at somebody who's a marketing professional, they have their own exemption in the professional services exemption, where you want to take a look at that one versus the standard business to business exemption, which you can also take a look at. And I know people who just have one standard business to business exemption clause that they use in their agreements. So it really depends on the nature of who you're bringing in and what you're having them do for you that would dictate that. But it's probably best to start. And that's why I said my starting point is that standard business to business exemption.
Great. And you know what we'll do is we will put your contact information into the chat before we're done. So anybody who has a specific question about their work situation can reach out to you directly, you know, beyond this event.
Great.
Yeah. So, okay, so we have a question from somebody who works for an entertainment company and hires independent acrobats and singers and dancers and all sorts of entertainers for single day events. So he is asking, noting that this is a gray area for the AB test. If I use a costume that we own that is very specific to my creative proposal, is that the same as a standard uniform? Also, am I telling the talent what to wear, and does that comply with part A of the ABC test?
Phenomenal question. It would lessen, and I'll tell you this, it would lessen the likelihood of the business to business exemption. The question is whether or not you could then get them in under the single engagement. Single engagement is a key exemption under AB2257. Again, it's so fact intensive that I don't want to come in here and make it sound as though I'm telling you yes or no, you can definitely do it. I would need to know the facts a little bit more, or one would need to know the facts a little bit more, but it sounds like you could most likely get them in depending on the nature of that particular event under the single engagement event of AB2257.
Okay, and then so to follow up with that, he's wondering too if he should start a separate costume rental company and rent them to the talent. Would that help?
I don't know if it would help necessarily. I don't know if it would hurt. I don't know if it would help. It might also blur the lines, and if this ever were to unfortunately go before a judge who might take a look at it and say no, it's really the same business. But I completely understand. I like the creative thinking there a lot too. I think the single engagement exemption might be able to cover, but again, it's so fact intensive there. But great question.
Okay, thank you. A couple questions have come through about a business license. Do all the performers I hire need to have a business license? What kind of business do you think they need to have to be exempt?
So I need to know a little bit more about the nature of your specific business, but if you are talking about day of help, my recommendation would be to make sure that they have some sort of business license. The easiest one to do is a sole proprietorship. That is generally the easiest one to form. There are not a lot of technical requirements that you need. I can get into some of the minutiae here, but it really, you don't need to worry about filling out corporate documents and securities. It's a handful of forms that you need to make sure you're in compliance with. And there are attorneys that specialize in business entity formation. But for the purposes of the client that I mentioned earlier that I worked with last year, they were an events company. They hired people to help with some of their main events. And they always required that they show proof, usually of a sole proprietorship, a business tax certificate, which goes with the sole proprietorship, and made sure that it was current in order for them to work the events they were bringing them in for.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Sorry, lots of them are coming in, so trying to listen and ask at the same time. Do you know how COVID unemployment is impacting the termination of employees?
They're two completely separate laws in terms of employment classification. I mean, I do have some basic info in terms of COVID unemployment allows for additional unemployment benefits, but if you're talking about who generally gets it, when we're talking independent contractors versus employees, usually there are some situations where independent contractors are able to submit unemployment and get the unemployment between gigs. It's much more common that it's an employee that has been let go for pandemic related reasons, financial costs, that the unemployment applies. But unemployment is sort of a different topic and just the employment issue altogether, and has a lot of its own crazy requirements. What I don't want to do is get into that and completely confuse people.
So it does definitely cross, sort of like there's an X. I feel like there's an X between AB5 and employment and COVID, sort of all rows are sort of like converging and crossing. Here's a question. If we work business to business, should my company be signing the other business's contract, or can they sign ours? By signing ours, does that negate business to business?
No, by signing yours is actually exactly what you should have with business to business. One of the 12 requirements in business to business, the business to business exemption, is that you have something in writing. Whether or not they sign yours or you sign theirs really is much more dependent on what's actually in the contract. And where I always caution people is just remember, the hiring entity, the person doing the hiring, if you are hiring them and they have their contract, chances are good, especially if you're talking about a larger venue or a large company in general, chances are good that they have independent counsel reviewing and making sure that they're in compliance with it. What you might want to do is just make sure that their contract says exactly what it needs to say, because at the end of the day, the burden is going to be on you if this were to ever go to escalate into a fight between how the employee should have been classified or how the worker should have been classified. The burden is going to be on you to prove as the hiring entity that it was an independent contractor relationship, not an employee-employer relationship.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Okay, so I'll just kind of read what's going on in the chat, which isn't directly related to you, Jonathan, but you brought up an important topic. Is somebody had asked what MPI is doing to lobby an exemption for the meeting events industry, like the one for travel agents. And Aaron, our chapter administrator, has chimed in and says, because MPI is a 501c3, we cannot and do not lobby. Meeting means business, and U.S. travel typically represents meetings and travel, which are separate organizations. So Jonathan, I know that you have a lot of nonprofit experience. So is there anything that you can add to that?
I'm trying to understand what was the question there in terms of.
The question is what is MPI? So what is our organization lobby? And the answer to that.
Oh, wait, sorry, you were cutting out there.
Oh, sorry. So the question is, what is MPI doing to lobby? The answer is MPI does not lobby because we're a 501c3, but there are other event and meeting planning organizations that do. Meetings Means Business is one of them. U.S. Travel is one of them. Also, CAPE is one of them. So just, want to know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, not particularly. I mean, they obviously, I think they've done an excellent job, to be completely honest with you. My thoughts are the catch-up legislation for the meetings world in general was so much more beneficial than for other groups. I've worked with other groups that lobbied hard and did not have any success in the catch-up legislation to bring on additional factors. So I mean, I think the lobbying efforts so far have been great. And if there are other factors that you want to bring in, continue to press them. But yes, obviously the 501c3 nonprofit lobbying status is something you need to consider. If you guys have, I'm not a lobby law expert. I know how they generally apply, and I don't want to give any thought there in terms of how much lobbying one could or couldn't do. But it sounds like you have a pretty firm policy not to lobby, which is an excellent policy.
Correct. So a lot of areas where we could go here. I think that we're going to go into some breakouts now, which I'm going to talk about. And I'm wondering, Aaron, if before we do that, you can put in Jonathan's contact information, because several people, Jonathan, are going to want to contact you. So glad for you for that. And I want to thank you for providing this information. I feel like it's been a bit of a whirlwind of content, and it's speakers like you that really help keep our professional and personal interests in our industry alive. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate it. I know I gave a ton of information, and I realize some of you your heads may be spinning. Hopefully the wine and cheese helped, but what I would say generally is feel free to ask me any questions. I'm more than happy to take any follow-up questions and clarify any confusion, or just clarify anything that I can help based on this presentation and at any time. So definitely feel free to contact me. And thank you again, Spencer and Rachel, for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very, very, very much.
Rachel, if I could jump in. Jonathan, I just wanted to thank you personally. And to everybody listening, Jonathan reached out to us and really just wanted to share this information with all of us. So please, if you feel like you're in a situation where you could benefit from his advice and his knowledge, please reach out to him and, schedule a time and get together with him and see how he can help you. By most accounts, we're looking at a stellar year in front of us. So don't let what you're doing be derailed by making a couple of small mistakes. Reach out and do the right thing now and get yourself taken care of. Thank you again, Jonathan. Really great information.
Thank you. Jonathan's not quite going anywhere yet, though. So at this point, we're just going to spend the last 10 minutes or so of our time together today in 2 breakout sessions. So really, they're conversation hubs that we've created. And Aaron is going to be placing you in one of these